Hello and welcome to Head to Head on UATV. Now, the big news in Ukraine several days ago was that former Ukrainian member of parliament, Mykola Martynenko, was arrested. He's suspected of being involved in corruption and abuse of office. He's also being investigated for his connections to a criminal organization. Martynenko is the second high-ranking official to be detained within 2 months, following the arrest of Ukraine's former tax chief, Roman Nasyrov. So are these latest events proving to be a turning point in Ukraine's anti-corruption drive? Joining us in the studio to talk about this is Anatasiya Krasnosilka. She is a lawyer at the Anti-Corruption Action Centre. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Greetings.
So this Martynenko case, we're watching it closely at the moment. What are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, the case of Martynenko once again proves us that there are no untouchable people for National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. For us, this is the good sign that National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine is first effective in its investigations and is politically independent. We've seen how NABU was after people from different political fractions, after people with very good political connections. We see that none of them are in a position to escape prosecution by National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office.
Yeah, and how do you prepare for a case like this? Now, for example, how did Martynenko come under your radar? How did this case come across, first of all?
Well, actually, almost a year ago, there was an information that Martynenko is already under investigation in Switzerland, where allegedly he's being investigated for participation in a bribing of Ukrainian official for participation of Czech company in public bids here in Ukraine. Then this case was taken by National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and that's the result. In less than a year, if I'm not mistaken, Martynenko is informed of suspicion in this case.
And now we fast forward to today, and we have his case as well, and the bail, which was set at how much was the bail? It was like 300 million Ukrainian hryvnias.
The Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office is requesting 300 million.
So that's about $11 million.
Yes, but it is very common, unfortunately, for Ukrainian courts to decrease the amount of bail.
And this is what happened with Nasyrov as well.
Yes, this is what happened with Nasyrov.
Because his bail was originally astronomical. It was a lot of money, but eventually it got paid by somebody close to him. Do you think that the source of this bail money should also be investigated as well?
Yes, of course. Actually, Nasyrov was released under a bail of 100 million hryvnias, which is a considerable sum. This amount was paid by his wife, but National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine announced that they are going to investigate the origin of this money, and I think that this investigation could also lead to some more criminal cases being opened.
Yeah, and we talk about Nasyrov and Martynenko and possibly future Ukrainian or former Ukrainian officials who will be prosecuted, but how do you go about building a case against these people within your organization? Because you have you have a relatively small team, don't you?
Yes, but we have a team of good lawyers, and basically we are proud to say that most of the cases opened against Yanukovych and his cronies were actually opened according to our claims. So we were the first source who gathered this information, and we are very upset with how Prosecutor General Office basically failed to investigate these cases and to submit them to court for 3 years by now.
Yeah, I see. And you do invaluable work to bring these cases forward, but you said you have these stumbling blocks. So has there been any improvement in that in the past 1 or 2 years even between taking your case to the prosecutor's office and then processing it? I mean, with
prosecutor's office, unfortunately, there is no improvement for past 3 years, but with National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, we are more or less satisfied. As of now, they have more than 200 investigations and more than, if I'm not mistaken, 60 cases submitted to court, which is a good result for 2 years of operation of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. Once again, we are proud to say that National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine is independent in its investigations. But unfortunately, what we see is that courts are blocking all the efforts of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we do not enjoy independent judiciary in Ukraine, and this is perfectly visible in how cases of top officials suspected in corruption are being heard in court.
Yeah, and it's not just your view, but it's also the view of other anti-corruption organizations and not just ones based in Ukraine, but international ones as well. And why do you think this is? Why do you think the courts are blocking?
The answer is very simple. We do not have independent courts in Ukraine, unfortunately. All the efforts to have judicial reform by now failed. As of now, we are selecting only the Supreme Court of Ukraine as first stage of judicial reform. But cases of NABU are being considered by first instance court. Years and years will pass until these cases might go to new independent Supreme Court if it's finally in place.
But you're not going to give up your work, though. You're just going to keep going forward.
We see that the top priority for anti-corruption reform in Ukraine would be establishment of independent anti-corruption court. And here independence is the key. We basically see that there is no discussion whether we need anti-corruption court or not. The court will be established sooner or later. The key question here is who and how will select future anti-corruption judges.
Well, that's a good question. How do you think?
We think that the only option here would be to call for international involvement in selection procedure for anti-corruption judges. Now we see that bodies who currently select judges for Ukraine, High Qualification Commission of Judges and High Council of Justice, are not doing their job well. There are all types of manipulations in the competition for a new Supreme Court right now. So we basically simply cannot trust these bodies to select independent anti-corruption judges. Our ideal option would be to have special selection panel where people nominated by international community would also be present with decision-making powers and probably also with blocking voices. We have seen this happen with a selection panel that's actually selected Artem Sitnik, and this is why now we enjoy independent anti-corruption bureau. So we think that the same experience should be applied to selection of anti-corruption judges.
Yes, yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of foreign investors, perhaps people watching this program, would say that the main obstacle for them bringing their money to Ukraine is actually this corruption.
Corruption in courts. If I'm not mistaken, the recent survey shows that it's not just corruption that is preventing international investors from coming, but it is corruption in judicial system.
And that's the main thing. And have you seen any change in that at all, or in the future?
Unfortunately, in judicial system, we're not seeing any considerable progress of reforms. Moreover, our position is not to make anti-corruption reform dependent from success of overall judicial reform. Why? 3 years ago, we were told that we do not need NABU as independent institution to investigate top corruption because there would be prosecutorial reform and all the investigation would be perfect and independent. But this never happens, unfortunately. So we are afraid that overall judicial reform will take years, this is for sure, and its result is under question right now. So our only option for anti-corruption reform is to proceed quickly with creation of independent anti-corruption court, and once again, not to make anti-corruption reform dependent of success of judicial reform in 10 more years.
Yeah, I actually watched another interview with you about 9 months ago on Ukraine's national public broadcaster, and you said the same thing, like the top 3 priorities would be the independent courts, the independent judges, and also the people who give evidence as well, for them and not to be prosecuted if they do give evidence. So has there been any progress on the last point as well, or is that still the case? You know, can they still be prosecuted for giving evidence in certain cases?
Well, people who give evidences are more or less protected, but as of now, we see basically how attorneys of Anishchenko are trying to cancel information that these people gave in these cases. This remains a problem. A huge problem here is that National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine still does not have powers for independent wiretapping, and independent wiretapping is all over the globe one of the most effective ways to get legal evidences for cases of corruption. Unfortunately, right now, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine performs wiretapping through State Security Service, which is once again politically dependent, and which results in fruitless wiretapping, basically. The draft law that provides for independent wiretapping for NABU is adoption of this draft law is a benchmark in cooperation between Ukraine and IMF, but unfortunately, for almost a year, this draft law is stuck in the parliament without consideration.
Yeah, so this is is one of the key priorities.
As for anti-corruption courts, new law on judiciary that was adopted in June 2016 provides for creation of anti-corruption court. But almost a year once again has passed, and we basically have not seen any efforts on the part of the president to proceed with establishment of anti-corruption court. According to the legislation, one more law is needed in order to define procedures for creation of anti-corruption court. Such a draft law was submitted by MPs, but the president, as of now, is not giving his support to this draft law. Instead, he's claiming that this draft law is unconstitutional.
I see. And I have one final question, the last question for you. How important is foreign pressure to bringing these suspected people of corruption to justice? How important are they?
Basically, I would say that the role of international partners of Ukraine was crucial and still remains crucial in establishment and securing anti-corruption institutions. I would say that the creation of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine in an independent way became possible only because of harsh pressure from the EU. As you know, this has been a conditionality for visa liberalization for Ukraine, and this has also been a conditionality in cooperation with International Monetary Fund. Because of the pressure from internationals and from the civil society, it basically became possible to adopt legislation on this institution, to establish these institutions, and right now to secure their independence.
Okay, Anastasya, thank you very much for coming into our studio, and best of luck with your work.
Thank you. That's my pleasure.
Thank you. That was Anatasiya Krasnosilka. She's a lawyer at the Anti-Corruption Action Centre. You're watching UATV.